Hey guys, welcome back to another video. This one will be a little bit different, a lot bit different than my other videos, as the title suggests. So about a month ago, the team over at Dehancer approached me and asked if I would test out their plugin. Dehancer is a plugin for both photo and for video that aims at emulating film on digital. This obviously was very interesting to me. I dedicate this channel pretty much to shooting film. However, I began on digital. I shoot digital films. Emulating the look of analog film on digital has always been something that I have pursued. I've attempted it before in video form, and I'm constantly behind the scenes trying to get that look from digital. So the team over at Dehancer gave me their plugin to use for free. It retails for a few $100s depending on which plugin you get. However, they said that I am supposed to give an unbiased review. They did not pay me to make this review, they just gave me a license so that I could test out their product. So I have complete creative control over my opinions on the plugin. So today we'll be looking at the Dehancer photo plugin, and I'll kind of go through my process with some sample images and show you what I like to do to my photos and what my thoughts are on the plugin. Hey, so I'm noticing that the recording is a bit crunchy. I think it was my encoder settings on OBS, so I apologize ahead of time, but the tutorial is still there, even if it looks a little funky. So the Dehancer film plugin is currently available for Adobe Photoshop, Lightroom Classic, and Capture One. Though when you're using the plugin, it actually opens into its own interface with its own controls. I am going to be using the Lightroom Classic plugin today on the Mac. After installing the plugin from the site, there are a few prerequisites that the team at Dehancer kind of recommends before getting started. The first of which is to change your color profile if you're on Mac. Not really sure how to do it on PC. I think PC by default uses the recommended color profile, but if you're on Mac and your display monitor is not set to the right color profile, this is how you do it. You're going to go to Displays. Disregard this capture display here, that's how I'm capturing my Mac screen. But if you're under built-in display and you scroll down to color profile, it by default can be on color LCD. You're going to want to scroll all the way down to this sRGB one, which will allow you to see a wider range of colors that will be good for photo editing. The photos that we'll be looking at today are a little bit varied. It is also recommended that you shoot RAW. Actually, it's kind of basically a requirement that you shoot RAW. The latitude that you get from shooting RAW gives you a lot of control in post. I believe most digital cameras nowadays shoot RAW, but I also may be completely out of the loop there. So here we are in Lightroom. We have imported the photos that we're going to look at today. We have a sunset at the beach, a little nighttime, a portrait of my friend Aaron, and Aaron again, but at sunset. Very nice sunset. This is the first one that we're going to look at, the portrait. So the other prerequisites are kind of setting up your photo to be edited. So let's go over to develop here. You're going to first want to change the profile to Adobe Standard. I often change the temperature to daylight, just kind of a hard daylight, 5600 Kelvin. I don't usually mess with the tint. They then suggest these settings for exposure, though recommendations like this are always kind of good starting places, but not what you should do every single time, because every photo is different, every situation is different. So we're going to drop the exposure by 1, do -40 on the contrast, go over to the blacks, do +60, and then especially shooting RAW, make sure that your sharpening is on 0. You don't really want the artificial sharpening. Now I'm going to make my own adjustments here. I'm going to pump the vibrance a little bit, actually a lot. I usually like a more vibrant photo. In the Dehancer plugin, there are its own exposure settings, so this is not the end of messing with exposure. This is just kind of giving us a good starting point. So next step is to either go to Photo, Edit in, and then Edit in Dehancer Lightroom plugin, or you can do the hotkey, which is Command Option E, which is what I like to do. You're going to want to change the file format to TIFF, though if you want to export in JPEG, you can as well. But if you want the highest quality, TIFF, and bit depth at 16 bits. These settings are for the output settings, the file that comes after you edit it. So it's going to launch Dehancer here, as you can see. So the interface is kind of a lot. On the left-hand side, we have our film profiles, a selection from color negative, motion picture, positive, black and white, instant, and a few other films, cross-processed, a lot of options. On the top here, we can show or hide the inspector, which shows our RGB and exposure, as well as a little zoom guy. I just want to also say that these were shot all on my Sony a6300 with a 28mm S-Artisan lens. I'll link it in the description below, the setup I used, and I also used a diffusion filter. On the right-hand side, we have our settings. So just to quickly run through these, we have the source settings, which include temperature and tint. Below we have expand, which allows you to adjust your exposure for black point and then white point. Under print, because film is kind of a two-process thing, you know, you shoot it and you have it on the film reel, but the way that it gets put onto things is known as the print. And so Dehancer offers various ways that you can quote-unquote print the film. By default, if you shoot color negative, you'd probably be using the Kodak Endura glossy paper. The Fujifilm 3513 and the Kodak 2383 are both motion picture print. And so if you do a motion picture preset, these pairings work the best. Additionally, we have log and linear. Linear is used often with color positive. But again, these are all recommendations and starting points, but none of them are definitive. You can always customize what you want to do and whatever look you're going for. After that, we have exposure, our contrast, our color density, saturation, and analog range limiter, which kind of limits the dynamic range to that of film. Up next, we have color head, which is a adjustment for the overall cast of colors. I will be using this later. Now, some very unique features to Dehancer are film grain, halation, and bloom. Vignettes, kind of, you see it everywhere. For film grain, the Dehancer film grain is very good, in my opinion. It's a lot more controlling than other film grain plugins. So if we check it off here, there are options for adjusting the size, the amount, the resolution, how much film grain is in the shadows, the midtones, the highlights, and even add color to film grain. Additionally, there is film type, because film grain response is different on positive and negative film. And then there's an experimental feature for digital, which kind of gives like a VCR look, like tape. I don't really mess around with it. I always keep it on analog. We have halation. So halation is the little glow that you get not over everything, which is bloom, and we'll get to that, but halation is when things are overexposed in film and they will glow kind of a red. You see it a lot on Cinestill film, which has its remjet layer removed. You see it a lot on a lot of motion picture film, and I mean, you'll see it on 35mm film as well. If we really crank it up and exaggerate it, you can see here how the extreme highlights will have the halation, the glow. Additionally, there's a mask mode that allows you to see only that, so you can really hone in what you're doing. The other glow that I was talking about is bloom, which takes, again, the highlights and acts as kind of a diffusion filter, but only for the highlights. I use a diffusion filter, so I'm not gonna mess around with bloom too much, but it honestly depends on the photo. Right here we have vignette, which is pretty familiar to anyone who's used a photo editing software. It's the kind of border darkness that you get, especially on lenses where the front piece kind of interrupts the glass. If we exaggerate it, take off the feather, yeah, that's what a vignette looks like. So let's run through the process here for how I would edit this photo. For this photo, I'm gonna see about color negative. At least use that as a starting point. I will say that it benefits knowing what film you have used before. So because every film stock has its own characteristics, it does benefit to know what those characteristics are. For example, Fuji is very cold and green heavy, whereas films like Kodak Gold, as the name implies, are very warm and have a yellow cast over them. So if you know these attributes, you can really try to get that effect in Dehancer. I'm going to start with Kodak Gold. Additionally, we have a push and pull option. So if you've ever pushed or pulled film when developing, it does change the qualities of it a little bit. So this aims to replicate that. As you can see, the color will change. I'm going to keep it standard. So it's already looking pretty warm. As I said, I'm going to keep it on Kodak Indoor Glossy Paper. I'm just going to boost the exposure a little bit. I'm going to drop the contrast, but then bring up the black point. Because I want it to be crunched and I want the blacks kind of to be more gray. I'm going to put the color density up a little bit so I can get more of her base color. So color head I am going to use here because again, I know the qualities of Kodak Gold. So I'm going to push the yellow a little bit, but I don't want it too much, but take down the impact a little bit. Now we're going to go to film grain. I know the qualities of Kodak Gold's film grain. It's a little bit medium sized. Definitely nothing like a lower speed, even though it is 200 speed. It's nothing like Ektar or Portra 160. So I'm going to bump the size a little bit, keeping the amount the same. I am going to go to shadows. I'm gonna basically remove all of the grain from the highlights and put the midtones a little bit less, because grain doesn't respond linearly. It responds to the exposure that you shot it at. So a lot of highlights aren't gonna have a lot of grain in them. I'm going to bump the color on the grain because I often see a lot of color in my grain. And to me, if you don't have color, it kind of looks like added grain. So I like adding the color. I like the imperfections, basically. Gonna keep the grain type at negative. Gold does have a little bit of halation, but not a lot. So I'm gonna go to mask mode to see exactly what I'm doing here. You can see a bit on her face and on this clapboard. I'm gonna boost the local diffusion a little bit so we can get it here. But we're getting too much on her face now. So what I'm gonna do is bump the source limiter. Now we're gonna go down to bloom. It's adding a bit of glow, as you can see. Mask mode doesn't see bloom as well because I don't know, the color is like white, but you can kind of see it there. Again, I'm gonna hit the source limiter. So not everything's getting bloomed, but I do like the soft look. Additionally, they recommend doing save lights at about 80, which offers a really good glow while also not crunching the exposure. And my lens naturally has a more vignette that I would like, so I'm not going to add any further vignette. I'm actually going to take down the bloom a little bit. But yeah, this is how I would edit this photo, and I'm pretty satisfied with it. So we're going to press OK. And basically it makes a copy of your original file as a TIFF or JPEG, whatever you chose. And you can go back to the main one, continue editing that, or you can reveal this in Finder. Okay, let's look at this photo that I got of my friend Iman on the beach. The reason I'm using this one is because I'm going to try to do a color positive effect and see how that works. I think color positive film looks really good on the beach, especially during golden hour. Let's go over to the left and choose color positive and make sure that our print is linear. Nope, linear. And we're just going to kind of play through these right now and see which ones we like. I'm really liking this experimental Kodachrome here. I like the pink cast, the magenta cast that it has. Now I definitely want to crunch it a little bit. It looks a little too flat. Also, On the left side, pushing and pulling positive film has different effects that aren't as drastic, because pushing and pulling positive film, you don't have a lot of leeway that color negative has. And yeah, this is the before and this is the after. I kind of like how subtle it is, but it does capture what I was seeing at the time, which is always my goal with film, just kind of recreating the image that I had in my head. So I'm gonna press OK. And I want to show you this one because this one is a nighttime shot. So I'm going to try to replicate cinestill. So we're going to shoot at 3200 Kelvin, which is tungsten. We're going to follow a bit of the recommendations they had earlier, but we're going to kind of freestyle a little bit. Okay, so we're gonna go to color negative and find cinestill 800T. If you've ever shot cinestill, you know the qualities of it, the halation and the kind of greenness, to be honest, and a lot of film grain. So we're gonna try our best to replicate that. So I kind of like the look of this. I'm gonna take the black point up a lot. And then drop the contrast, which gives us a very faded look, which I like a lot, especially for a cinestill emulation. Okay, let's see what we can get out of the green here. Yeah, that's really green. Let's add some film grain. Keep the amount down, but I'm gonna boost the size and the color. We go down to halation now. This shot in particular doesn't have a lot of crazy source lights. I think the biggest halation would come from the front of the truck on its front right light. So we're gonna focus on that. Yeah, as you can see, it's the car light and the porch light. So let's bump up the local diffusion a little bit of global. Let's see what that looks like. Maybe amplify it, but then limit it and smooth it out. Oh, and we got a pretty good glow there. I think I want it less diffused. Maybe add a bloom. I don't want the bloom to be too overpowering. And as you can see, there's already a vignette on it. But that's a pretty good cinestill 800T emulation, in my opinion. I think we really captured the qualities of cinestill. Lastly, let's quickly look at this photo we have of Aaron. This photo is interesting because it already looks pretty good. The lighting is just nice. Again, I'm kind of leaning towards a color positive film here. I just think it's the only one that would do this justice. But maybe to spice it up, I'll show you something different. Let's maybe tackle Superia. I shoot a lot of Superia and I'm very familiar with it. So we can try to replicate that effect, but with Dehancer. So I like the effect of pulling it because you get some of these greens out of the midtones and shadows down here, which I like a lot. Let's crunch the contrast again, but then bring out some of the blacks. Let's boost the white point, get some of that, maybe even crush it a little bit. Color head, again, I'm going to try to bring some green into it. I like to really emphasize it, but then bring it back on the impact. Let's add some film grain. Superia doesn't have a lot of halation, to be honest, but I will add it because it adds a little bit of a glow on these rooftops, which is nice. And then I'm not going to add bloom. I just feel like it overpowers it a little bit, but here's my Superia edit. So that's a look at the Dehancer plugin for photo. It is honestly very powerful. I am both surprised and impressed with the amount of detail that the Dehancer team has put in with their research with the qualities of analog film and the way that the plugin replicates things like that. Things like film grain, color head, print, all of those are very specific to analog film, and they've put in a lot of effort into getting that look on digital. Will it replace film? Probably not. The true look of film is extremely hard to emulate. With the rising prices of film and the ease of shooting digital, it is very enticing for people like me to shoot digital and emulate some sort of film look, even if it's not one-to-one exactly like film. I think that the plugin complements digital very well and gives a very good look to it that is close to film. Thank you to the team over at Dehancer for reaching out, allowing me to use their plugin, and I hope my review is helpful to anyone who is deciding whether or not they should get the plugin. There is a free trial that they have, as well as I have a affiliate code I'll put on screen now because I have not decided what it would be, but if you use this code you'll get discount, hopefully. I don't know. Try it out for yourself, see what you think about it. Until next time, peace.